Rachel Morgan woke up early that Friday morning. The kind of morning where the sky was pale gray and the world felt quiet before the city stirred awake. She wasn't nervous, not exactly, but there was a small flutter in her chest that refused to settle. Today she was driving to Portland with her boss, Daniel Carter, for a business meeting. It was a simple trip for hours on the road, but something about it felt different. Maybe it was because it would be just the two of them. Rachel had worked for Daniel for almost 3 years at Carter & Co., small but successful marketing firm in Seattle. She respected him deeply. He was kind yet firm, confident but never arrogant, a man who carried quiet authority. At 43, he was experienced and well-liked, a natural leader who made everyone around him feel calm. Rachel, 36, admired that about him. She admired many things about him, though she rarely allowed herself to think about them for too long. He was her boss, and that line was one she had promised herself never to cross. By the time Daniel's dark SUV pulled up outside her apartment, the morning had softened with a light drizzle. Rachel grabbed her coat, coffee, and briefcase, double-checking everything twice before stepping out. He got out of the car as soon as he saw her, opening the passenger door with a polite smile. "Good morning, Rachel," he said warmly. "Ready for the road?" She returned the smile. "As ready as I'll ever be. I brought coffee. That should help." "Perfect," he said, his voice easy, relaxed. "Let's get going before the rain gets worse." As the city disappeared behind them, the hum of the tires and the steady rhythm of the rain filled the quiet space between them. Rachel tried to focus on the road, on the work they were going to do, but she couldn't help glancing at him now and then. There was something comforting about the way he drove, calm, focused, no rush. She liked that about him too. At first, their conversation stayed light. They discussed the meeting, new clients, and office gossip. But soon as the miles passed and the sky began to clear, the talk shifted into something more personal. Daniel asked about her family. Rachel told him about her mother's retirement and her late father's bookstore, a small shop filled with secondhand novels and old photographs. Daniel listened with interest, his expression softening. "A bookstore," he said. "That explains a lot." "Explains what?" she asked, curious. "The way you see people," he said. "You notice small things. That's rare." It was such a simple thing to say, but it lingered in her mind. Daniel wasn't a man who said things without meaning them. His words carried weight. Rachel turned toward the window, pretending to focus on the passing trees, but her thoughts were far from the view. Compliments from him always felt like more than they sounded. An hour later, they stopped at a gas station outside Olympia. Daniel filled the tank while Rachel grabbed snacks from the convenience store. When she returned, he was leaning against the car, looking at the horizon. The early sunlight had started to break through the clouds, casting a soft glow across his face. He looked different somehow, less like her boss and more like someone she wanted to know beyond spreadsheets and meetings. They got back on the highway, and this time the conversation drifted into dreams, the kind of talk that happens only when two people forget they're supposed to be careful. Daniel asked her if she'd ever thought about doing something else with her life. "Sometimes," Rachel admitted. "But I'm not really brave enough to start over. I like stability, knowing what comes next." He smiled faintly, his eyes on the road. "You know what I've always admired about you?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That I'm good at organizing reports." He chuckled. "That you make everything feel calmer, even when things are falling apart." The car grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt heavier, not uncomfortable, but filled with a quiet awareness neither could name. Rachel's chest felt tight. It was such an ordinary compliment, but coming from him, it meant something more by noon. They stopped at a roadside diner, one of those old places with checkered floors, red booths, and the smell of bacon and coffee in the air. The waitress greeted them like she'd known them forever. Daniel insisted she try the pancakes, saying they were famous, though she suspected he just wanted her to relax. Over lunch, their laughter came easily. Rachel found herself telling him about things she never shared at work, how she painted on weekends, how she once dreamed of studying art, how she still sometimes stayed up late just to read under a blanket like she did as a kid. Daniel listened closely, his gaze steady and kind. "You paint?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "That's amazing. You've never mentioned that?" "It's just a hobby," she said, shrugging lightly. "Nothing special. Special if it matters to you," he said softly. "You shouldn't hide that." Rachel felt her breath catch for a second. There was warmth in his voice that went beyond kindness. It wasn't flirtation, it was something gentler, deeper. She didn't know how to respond. So she smiled and looked down at her coffee instead. They left the diner an hour later, both quieter than before. The sky had cleared and the road stretched ahead, endless and bright. Rachel leaned against the window, her thoughts drifting. She wasn't sure what had changed between them, but something had. The space between them felt charged, not romantic in an obvious way, but layered with unspoken understanding. Around mid-afternoon, Daniel slowed the car near a coastal viewpoint overlooking the Pacific. "We've got time," he said, pulling over. "Want to stretch your legs?" Rachel nodded, stepping out into the wind. The ocean stretched endlessly below, waves crashing against dark rocks, the sound powerful and calming at once. She wrapped her coat tighter and breathed in the salt air. "This is beautiful," she said softly. Daniel stood beside her, his hands in his pockets. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," he admitted. "Helps me remember what actually matters." She turned to look at him, surprised by the honesty in his tone. "And what matters to you?" He was quiet for a moment before answering. "People who stay true to themselves. People who care, even when it's not easy." His eyes met hers then, and for a heartbeat. She forgot how to breathe. Rachel quickly looked away, pretending to watch the waves. "You sound like someone who's been thinking about that a lot lately." "Maybe I have," he said quietly. The air between them grew still. There was no need for more words. The sound of the ocean said everything that couldn't be spoken. Rachel felt something shift deep inside her. Not love, not yet, but a stirring she hadn't felt in a long time. When they finally returned to the car, Daniel glanced at her before starting the engine. His voice was gentle. "Thank you for coming on this trip, Rachel. I didn't realize how much I needed the company." She smiled faintly. "I'm glad you asked me." As they continued toward Portland, the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the road in soft gold. Rachel leaned back, watching the light flicker across Daniel's face, and felt something settle quietly in her heart. Something warm, fragile, and new. Maybe this trip wasn't just another work assignment. Maybe it was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. And though Rachel didn't know what would come next, one thing was certain: this road, this day, this quiet connection would stay with her long after the journey ended. The next morning began with sunlight spilling through the hotel window and the distant hum of city life below. Rachel woke up slowly, the events of the previous day replaying in her mind: the long drive, the laughter, the quiet conversation by the ocean. It all felt strangely close to her heart, like a dream she didn't want to end. But today was business. Today she had to be composed, professional, the assistant Daniel could rely on. She dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue suit and light blouse, simple, neat. Nothing that would draw attention. When she knocked on Daniel's hotel room door to confirm the meeting schedule, he opened it already dressed, his tie slightly loose, a coffee in his hand. "Morning, Rachel," he greeted her warmly. "Ready for the big day?" She smiled, hiding her nerves. "I hope so. You always make it look easy." He laughed softly. "That's the trick. Pretend you're calm until you actually are." They left for the client's office, and for the next few hours, the day moved quickly. Rachel watched Daniel in his element, confident, persuasive, effortlessly composed. He had a way of making everyone in the room feel valued, a quality that always impressed her. When the meeting ended, their clients shook hands with genuine enthusiasm, praising their presentation. As they walked back to the car, Daniel looked at her and said, "You were incredible in there. I couldn't have done that pitch without you." Rachel shook her head. "You're the one who closed the deal." Smiled. "Maybe, but you're the one who made it possible." Something about his tone made her heart flutter. It wasn't flirtation, it was appreciation, real and sincere. But it touched her deeply all the same. By the time they returned to the hotel, the sun was dipping behind the city's skyline. They had one more night before heading back to Seattle. Daniel suggested they grab dinner at a quiet restaurant nearby, one with a view of the river. Rachel hesitated for a moment. She didn't want anything that could seem inappropriate, but his voice was casual, friendly, so she agreed. The restaurant was softly lit, with candles flickering on each table and the gentle sound of jazz in the background. It wasn't fancy, but it felt warm and intimate. Daniel ordered wine, and Rachel allowed herself a glass too, though she wasn't much of a drinker. They talked about everything. Not work this time, but life, choices, regrets. Rachel told him how she had once been engaged years ago, but called it off when she realized the man she was with didn't truly see her. Daniel nodded, not prying, but listening with quiet empathy. "I think the hardest thing," she said softly, "is when people stop noticing you. You can be in the same room, but it's like you fade out." Daniel looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I notice you, Rachel. I always have." The words hit her like a wave, gentle but deep enough to make her chest tighten. She wasn't sure what to say. She didn't want to misunderstand him. But his eyes told her it wasn't just kindness. Before she could respond, their food arrived, breaking the moment. The rest of dinner passed more quietly. The air between them had shifted, not awkwardly, but with a weight they both felt. Rachel smiled and spoke when she could, but part of her was lost in thought. After dinner, they walked along the riverwalk. The night was cool, and a faint breeze carried the scent of the water. City lights reflected in the rippling surface, stretching like gold threads in the dark. Rachel wrapped her scarf tighter as Daniel walked beside her, silent but close enough that she could feel his presence. "You did a lot today," he said softly. "You should be proud." "I am," she replied, glancing at him. "But I think I'll sleep for a week when we get back." He chuckled, then paused as if something crossed his mind. "Actually," he said, reaching into his coat pocket, "I got you something." Rachel blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For putting up with me on this trip," he said with a small smile. "And for saving that meeting earlier. You deserve it." He handed her a small box, simple and wrapped in white paper. Rachel hesitated, unsure if she should accept it, but his expression was gentle. No pressure, just sincerity. She unwrapped it carefully and found a delicate silver bracelet inside, with a tiny charm shaped like an open book. Her breath caught. "Daniel, this is beautiful. It reminded me of what you said yesterday," he explained. "About your father's bookstore. Thought you might like it." Rachel's eyes shimmered with emotion. She looked at the bracelet, then at him, speechless. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you tell me," he said quietly. "You think I don't notice, but I do." There was no mistaking the emotion in his voice this time. It wasn't romantic in a bold way. It was tender, careful, filled with respect and something deeper. Rachel felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered. "Really? It means a lot." They stood there for a moment, watching the water, both caught in the fragile stillness of the night. Rachel wanted to say something to tell him how much that gesture meant, how seen it made her feel, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she slipped the bracelet on, the cool metal resting against her wrist, and smiled. When they walked back to the hotel, neither said much. The air between them was quiet but alive, full of things left unsaid. Inside the elevator, the soft hum filled the silence. Their reflections stood side by side in the mirrored walls to people who had crossed some invisible line without meaning to, as the elevator doors opened to their floor. Daniel turned slightly, his voice gentle. "Rachel, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable about today. The gift, it wasn't meant to complicate things." She shook her head. "It didn't. It was thoughtful. I appreciate it." "Good," he said, though his eyes held something else, relief, and maybe a hint of longing he didn't dare express. "You've done a lot for this company, Rachel. It's for me. I just wanted you to know that it doesn't go unnoticed." Rachel nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you think." They parted in the hallway, each retreating to their own room. But neither could shake the feeling that something had quietly changed. Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the bracelet glinting under the soft lamplight. She traced the charm with her thumb, thinking about his words, his tone. The way he looked at her by the river, she didn't want to overthink it. She knew better than to let feelings blur professional lines, yet her heart refused to stay neutral. She wasn't in love, but she was moved in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of connection that sneaks up on you, gentle, unplanned, but powerful. Across the hall, Daniel sat by his window, looking at the city lights. He wasn't sure what had come over him. The gift had seemed like a small gesture, but now he wondered if it had said too much. He respected Rachel, admired her strength, her kindness, her quiet intelligence. But somewhere along the line, that respect had grown into something he couldn't easily name. He didn't want to risk her comfort or his professionalism. But as he thought about her smile when she saw the bracelet, he knew that whatever he felt wasn't something he could simply ignore. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the evening, his words, his expression, the tenderness in his tone. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this trip would change something. Maybe not drastically, but quietly. In ways that would linger long after they returned home when she finally drifted to sleep. The bracelet still rested on her wrist. A small reminder of a moment that had reached her heart in the gentlest of ways. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew that something between them had begun. Something fragile. Beautiful and perhaps impossible, but real nonetheless. The next morning began with a quiet stillness that hung over everything. Rachel woke up before sunrise, the faint sound of city traffic echoing below her hotel window. Her suitcase was already packed, her coffee half finished, and yet her mind refused to settle. The bracelet Daniel had given her glinted softly on her wrist as she sat on the edge of the bed, replaying every word, every look from the night before. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something powerful, something she hadn't felt in years. She tried to shake it off. This was her boss. Her job mattered too much to let emotions blur the lines. Still, she couldn't ignore the warmth she felt when she thought of his kindness, his quiet attentiveness. And that gift that now carried more meaning than he might have realized. When she stepped into the hallway, she found Daniel waiting by the elevator, holding a cup of coffee for her. "Morning," he said with that easy smile that made him seem more human than the boss. "Morning," she replied, accepting the cup. "Thanks for this. Couldn't let my best assistant face the road without caffeine," he said lightly. But beneath the joke, there was a softness in his eyes that made her heart stir again. They checked out of the hotel and started the long drive back to Seattle. The first few miles passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the hum of the tires and the sound of the wind. Then, as the sun began to rise, Daniel said quietly, "You know, Rachel, yesterday made me realize something. I don't say thank you enough." She looked at him, surprised. "You do, actually. More than most people. Not enough to you," he said, glancing at her before turning his eyes back to the road. "You make everything work. You see details before anyone else does. You've built half this company without taking credit for it." Rachel felt her throat tighten, unsure how to respond. "That's kind of you to say." "It's true," he said softly. "And I don't want you to ever feel invisible." Those words landed deep, not because of what they said, but because of how he said them, like he truly saw her. Rachel turned her face toward the window, blinking back unexpected emotion. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the light golden and warm. And for a few moments, they both sat in silence that said more than words could. Hours later, as they neared Seattle, Daniel's phone buzzed. He ignored it, focused on the drive. "That's probably Ethan," he muttered. "My son? He's been asking when I'll be back." Rachel smiled softly. "He must miss you. He's growing fast," Daniel said, his tone filled with pride. "Sometimes I think I'm missing too much of it. Work just takes over, you know?" She nodded, understanding all too well. "Yeah, life has a way of slipping by while we're busy being responsible." He gave her a small, knowing smile. Exactly. When they reached the city, Daniel pulled up outside Rachel's apartment building. She unbuckled her seatbelt, hesitating before stepping out. The ride had felt longer, fuller somehow. As if something had quietly changed between them. Daniel got out too, walking around to help her with her suitcase, even though she insisted she could manage. As she reached for it, his hand brushed hers. The touch was brief, but enough to make both of them pause. "Thank you for everything, Rachel," he said. "Not just for the trip, for all of it. For being steady when everything else isn't." She smiled faintly, meeting his eyes. "That's my job, Daniel." He shook his head slowly. "No, that's who you are." The air between them grew quiet again. It wasn't awkward, just heavy with unspoken understanding. Then, as if remembering himself, Daniel stepped back and smiled. "Get some rest. You've earned it." "I will," she said softly. "And thank you for the bracelet. It really means a lot." "I'm glad," he replied, his eyes warm. "It suits you." Rachel stood there watching as he drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the city noise. When she finally went inside, she leaned against the door and exhaled, feeling something shift inside her. Not sadness exactly, but a deep, quiet ache. It wasn't about what was said or done. It was about what wasn't, the feelings that stayed behind, silent and tender. The days that followed slipped back into routine. Emails, meetings, deadlines. Daniel was the same, professional, kind, composed, but something unspoken now lingered in their exchanges. He'd glance at her during meetings just a moment longer than before. She'd notice when he smiled a little softer, or when his voice carried that hint of warmth that wasn't just about business. A week later, during a company meeting, Daniel announced the success of the project they'd presented on the trip. And, he said, looking straight at Rachel, none of this would have happened without Rachel's hard work. The room applauded, and Rachel felt her cheeks warm. She caught his eye for a second, and in that look, there was something like quiet pride, the kind that didn't need words. Later that day, as she was leaving the office, Daniel called out to her. "Hey, got a minute?" She turned, holding her bag. "Sure." He stepped closer, his tone lower, almost careful. "I wanted to ask if you're doing okay. You've been quieter since we got back." Rachel smiled lightly. "Just catching up on work. You know how it is." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "If you ever need to talk about anything, you know you can." "I know," she said softly. "Thank you, Daniel." For a moment, it seemed like he might say more, but then he just smiled. That same warm, rounded smile she'd come to admire, and stepped back. "Have a good evening, Rachel." "You too." As she walked to her car, the wind lifted her hair, and she touched the bracelet gently, tracing the small charm with her thumb. She realized that the gift wasn't just a token of thanks. It was a reminder of something deeper. That she was seen, valued, remembered. Weeks turned into months. Life continued. The pace of work, the meetings, the quiet coffee breaks where they exchanged small smiles but never crossed the line they both knew existed. Yet every so often, when Rachel caught sight of the bracelet, she felt that quiet warmth again. It wasn't love in the grand, dramatic sense. It was quieter, purer, built on respect, understanding, and something that would probably never be spoken aloud. But that didn't make it any less real. One evening, Daniel stopped by her desk before heading home. "I'm flying out tomorrow," he said. "New project. I'll be gone a few weeks." Rachel looked up from her screen. "Need me to prepare anything before you go?" He smiled. "Already done. I just wanted to say thank you again. For everything you do, Rachel. You make my world a little steadier." Her heart caught at the softness in his tone. "You're welcome," she said simply. "And be safe." He nodded, hesitated for a heartbeat, then added quietly, "I'll miss our coffee breaks." She laughed gently. "I'll save your seat." When he left, the office felt emptier than usual. Rachel stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the skyline, feeling that same mixture of peace and longing she'd felt by the river that night. Some connections weren't meant to be defined. They were meant to be felt, carried quietly, like a secret melody only two hearts could hear in the days that followed. Rachel wore the bracelet every day, not as a reminder of a complicated feeling, but as a token of gratitude for kindness, respect, and the rare beauty of being truly seen. And somewhere miles away on another business trip, Daniel found himself checking his watch during a quiet coffee break, smiling faintly as he thought of her, the woman who changed the way he saw the world, not with words, but with her quiet strength and heart. Both of them knew things could never be more than what they were. But in that unspoken truth lay something pure, a connection built not on longing, but on quiet appreciation. And sometimes that was enough.